Hi, and welcome to the final part of our little journey into dynamic processing. Downwards and upwards compression. The same with expansion. These terms were always a great mysterium to me. But once you dive a bit deeper, it's actually very simple and starts to make sense. So let's get directly started and take a very basic look at this topic. First, we need a threshold value. At the very end, this value is nothing else than a split point. To separate our signal into a louder part means everything going over the threshold, and a quieter part, so everything staying below this line. In Maximus, we have this kind of meter showing us the volume of the incoming signal. In my example loop, this means I separate my complete loop into the claps, which go always over the threshold, and the hi-hats, which stay always below. The same volume is indicated in the channel's peak meter too. While just the hi-hats peak at about -10 dB, the claps go up to -1 dB. If we are talking now about dynamic processing, it's about changing this space between the louder and the quieter parts, and there are several ways to do so. First, I could bring down the louder parts. Or I could bring up the quieter parts. Or both together for an extreme result. No matter how I do it, but reducing the dynamic range means I am talking about compression. From which direction the signal was compressed tells me now which kind of compression. Do I push the signal down towards the threshold? It's downwards compression. I am bringing the level of everything which exceeds the threshold level down in volume. When somebody speaks about compression, it's always about downwards compression. So this includes, for example, normal compressors, limiters, sidechain compression, and so on. Do we compress by pushing the lower signals up towards the threshold? It's upwards compression. Both ways reduce the dynamic range by the same amount, so why do we need upwards compression? As normal compression works on the louder parts of the signal, unwanted side effects like changed transients or pumping will be easily noticeable for the listener. Upwards compression, though, leaves the louder parts unaffected and can provide more loudness without causing any of these side effects. Last but not least, we've got the most extreme kind. Using downwards and upwards compression together is nowadays called OTT, as abbreviation for over the top, which pretty much expresses what is happening here. It got its name from a famous preset of the native multiband compressor of Ableton. Although the dynamic reduction is very extreme, it works so well on various sources that M.o.R Records has released this preset as a separate VST. Mixed in to the right amount, it's sometimes a real shit to gold converter. Let's start the same game again, but this time the other way around. Instead of bringing the parts closer towards the threshold, we can change the distance as well by moving away from it. Either by moving the top object upwards, or bringing the lower one down even more, or again a mixture of both. With all of these methods, we are increasing the distance between the objects. We bring them further apart. This is expansion. Increasing the space by bringing up the top object is upwards expansion. This is meant if somebody uses just the term expansion. Doing it by bringing down the lower object is downwards expansion. This is meant if somebody speaks about a gate. Using both methods together, I call here OTT expansion, but that's not an official term. That's just my fantasy. Enough theory, let's go into praxis and look how to apply it to the example loop. Maximus offers all methods, so it's the best plugin for demonstration. With a transfer graph like it's set here, there is no change at all in the sound. Input equals output. As before, we need a threshold value, a center point around which all actions revolve. If I now pull down a point above the threshold, I start to compress the signal, which reduces the peak level to about -6 dB. I compensate for that volume loss with the post level knob and turning the plugin on and off. Shows a quite different result. Increasing the level below the threshold by, for example, bending the graph upwards, or moving a point upwards, I am compressing the signal as well, but this time upwards. The movements you do in Maximals gives you automatically the name what you are doing. Compressing and moving point upwards is upwards compression. Before I pulled the point down to compress, this was downwards compression. Now I insert a point above the threshold and move it upwards, away from the threshold value. And you can hear now the attack of the clap starts to bang. Moving away from the threshold, that's expansion. And moving the point upwards in the graph is upwards expansion. As you can hear, this can for example be used for transient shaping. Here as well, the other way round. I create a point below the threshold and move it this time downwards. The hi-hats get quieter and quieter until they finally disappear completely. Again, we are moving the point away from the threshold. We are expanding. But as we are pulling down the point, we use downwards expansion. You heard the effect. This is typically known as gating. Only signals which levels exceed a certain value, the threshold, are let through. Everything else is cut out. Let's talk briefly about our extreme OTT options. Mostly they work with a lower and a higher threshold, as it's better for fine-tuning the effect. I use both compression methods at the same time. As the downwards compression brought down the peak level, I compensate for this volume loss. Of course, this example wouldn't be usable as it is now. Use the LMH mix knob to dial in the right amount. The same works the other way around too. If my goal is to isolate the clap in this loop and give it more attack, I use upwards expansion to enhance the transient of the clap and can use the gate at the bottom to reduce the hi-hat in the loop. So let's summarize this shortly. Everything relates to the threshold value. Moving points toward the threshold is compression, no matter from which side. Moving points away from the threshold is expansion, no matter from which side. If I compress by moving a point above the threshold downwards, it's downward compression. If I compress something by moving a point below the threshold upwards, it's upwards compression. If I expand by moving a point above the threshold upwards, it's upwards expansion. If I expand by moving a point below the threshold downwards, it's downward expansion. The direction you move the point determines the name. That easy. I hope this brought a bit more light into this topic. Thank you for watching.